Okay. So I'm going to offer a slightly different perspective to Olivier. I'll try not to go over each session that we had because you've heard that already, but I'll try and draw a few threads together. So for me, as someone who lives in England, who studies and teaches in a department of religions and theology, and teaches religion at university and in schools, laicité was not a concept I was familiar with, and I think it is very difficult for outsiders to understand. I first became aware of it when the issue of veiling was in the media and the ban on religious symbols in French schools. And of course, it's been in the news again recently when an employee of a privately run nursery was sacked for wearing an Islamic headscarf. Now, the court ruled that she'd been unlawfully dismissed, but this seemed to be a contentious issue among some people, and the debate began again. So, certain individuals consider the scarf to be just a symbol of belonging to the Muslim community. And according to that line of reasoning, women who wear the veil display their religious and community affiliation, which harms the unity and secularism of the French Republic. So we already know that conspicuous signs of religious affiliation, including Islamic headscarves, are already banned from French state schools, and full-face veils can't be worn in public places. And it was coming to this conference that I looked up some of these issues again, and I looked at an interview that was on RTL radio, yes, where Eric Zemmour, I'm probably going to say all the names wrong, spoke about 1970s France when French Jews took off their skull caps as soon as they stepped into the street so that nobody would be made to feel awkward by an ostentatious expression of faith. And he said this French way of living together was disrupted by the arrival of the community-based Anglo-Saxon model. Then on France Inter radio, Inter radio, Thomas Legrand said that the problem didn't lie with religious symbols as such, but specifically the Islamic headscarf, and he thought it said something about the place of women in certain neighbourhoods. So he said that the nursery that was not actually targeting a religion, but the expression of a sexist practice of religion, that it wasn't Islamophobia, but part of a fight for freedom and sex equality. So all sides in that debate say they're committed to a secular state, but under the banner of secularism, they pursue a diverse range of social and political agendas. Now, I was, and still am, opposed to the banning of the headscarf, but before this conference, that was my main knowledge of laicité. That was my only knowledge, the part that the media portrayed. I think we always have the danger of thinking that our way is the only way, or indeed the best way. So as an outsider, I'd seen the French system of laicité as something negative, as something that infringed on people's rights to show their identity. But my view has changed. This conference has been vital in explaining what the French people understand secularity to be, and why, as Liliane said at the beginning of the conference, they stand behind it as religious people do for religion. I feel I now have a much more rounded view. I can see the origins of the concept and what opportunities it can bring. Now, French secularism obviously has a long history, but the current model is based on the 1905 French law on the separation of churches and the state. And it meant the freedom of public institutions, especially primary schools, from the influence of the Catholic Church in countries where it had retained its influence. But during the 20th century, that evolved to mean equal treatment of all religions. Now, as we've seen from the keynotes, proponents assert that French state secularism is based on respect for freedom of thought and freedom of religion. So the absence of a state religion and the subsequent separation of the state and the church is considered by proponents to be a prerequisite for such freedom of thought. Laicité relies on the division between private life, where adherents believe that religion belongs, and the public sphere, in which each individual, adherents believe, should appear as a simple citizen equal to all others, devoid of ethnic, religious, or other particularities. Now, laicité, I didn't understand before, but I do now, by itself does not imply any hostility of the government with respect to religion. It's best described as a belief that government and political issues should be kept separate from religious organisations and religious issues. And that's meant to protect both the government from any interference from religious organisations and to protect religious organisations from interference by government. It's actually a way in which religions can thrive and minorities are not oppressed, And it seems at first paradoxical to say that religion thrives best under secularism, but in France in general it seems to be working. I especially liked the keynote yesterday on whether modernity can survive without religion by Dr. Gilles Bouquin. Am I saying that right? Yeah, where he asserted that in modernity, religion's scope is in no way closed. These questions remain open, and if I understand clearly the spirit of modern secularity, it does not pretend having the role of solving them, nor to ban their expression, but rather to regulate their social expansion, preventing that a religious answer wins over any other possible answer. And I think that is very important. We need to strike some kind of balance. I think the workshops were a great space to find out about how this issue is impacting on other countries. Personally, I attended workshops on the Christian presence in the Holy Land and anti-Semitism in Hungary. But I've been talking to other participants to find out about the workshops that I didn't get to go to. And I heard about the workshop on circumcision and the question of whether Israel is a secular state and all the interesting debates and arguments which were in both of them. I gave my own workshop on religion and education today with Dr. Edouard Robrecht, and it was fascinating to compare the problems that we face in England, where religious education is compulsory in all schools and 35% of state schools are religious schools, with a completely different system in France, and to hear his thoughts on the lack of religious education in secular schools, creating a kind of symbolic vacuum. The workshops always feel way too short, but I think that's a good sign, and we were able to debate the topics further over coffee breaks and lunch. Now, we're discussing very difficult issues, and inevitably, I think we end up with many more questions than we will ever have answers. But it's vital that we have somewhere like this, a conference like this, where we can ask these questions, where we can be challenged, and we can learn from others whose experiences are completely different to our own. I came here with a predetermined idea of what Laicité was, and I was wrong. And I hope other people have found that there's something different about this that they can learn from as well. Now, since I came to my first ICCJ conference in Krakow, I've learned more about other cultures, other religions, and people in general than I could possibly have ever learned in the classroom. So none of us are perfect, apart from Debbie, our president, of course. And we do have so much to learn from one another and to take back to our communities to tell them how other countries do it. And I'm really grateful to the ICCJ for bringing us all together.